everybody. This is Miles Turner, the Indiana Pacers, and listen to the Paceroos Podcast. Be sure to follow at Paceroos on Twitter.
Welcome back to the Paceroos Podcast. Adam, Alex, and Justin with you once again with a very special guest coming to us live from Indianapolis, from Fox Sports Indiana, Jeremiah Johnson. Thanks so much for being here.
It is great to be with you guys. I should say long-time listener, first-time caller. It's great to be speaking with some diehard Pacers fans in Australia, and keep up the great work, guys.
Awesome. We've got quite a few questions to get through. One of the topics we discussed on our last podcast was Miles Turner. Over the summer, he's been the starting center for Team USA. He's really emerged as the face of the franchise over the summer with the absence of Victor Oladipo, who's undergoing rehab. So what's been the biggest area that you've seen of growth for Miles over the summer?
Well, one thing that I just have noticed in the first week or two of training camp, and it's been the after-practice interviews, even though, we haven't had as many interviews to do because of our limited schedule in the preseason. And I've been listening into some of the other reporters from the market asking him questions. And I'll be honest, there's been times over the last, 4 years or so that Miles has been kind of short and brief with the media, especially after practice. He's always been really good after games on the court, especially after wins. But there are times after practice he hasn't really expanded on his comments that much. And I actually took note today that he had, over, 1 or 2 minute answers with each question and kind of answered each question with enthusiasm. And that's something that's very small, but I do think that portrays some confidence in Miles's, not just his game, but his place on this team. And you're right. I think that he kind of views himself as a face of a franchise type of player, probably, to be honest, even more than the team. I don't think the team wants to put that kind of pressure on him. I think at this point they really understand and acknowledge what Miles is as a player, and that is an elite defensive player, among the best in the NBA, definitely higher ranking than he was given credit for in the end-of-season awards, and, a serviceable offensive player, but someone that as your starting center can be an advantage over many of the opponent's starting centers. So that is what I think he is. But I also just think the confidence that I mentioned off the court, we've seen on the court. He's never going to be this Shaquille O'Neal post player where you throw him the ball in the post and he just is able to dominate. But he is an above average shooter and a really good shooter for someone of his size. And so I think that we've seen, even in the limited parts of training camp and even through Team USA, him working on, playing with bigger lineups, playing with Sabonis. I have a better feeling about how he can kind of fit alongside someone like Domantas Sabonis now than I even did in May or June, thinking about the prospects of this lineup. There will be some growing pains, but right now I feel really good about where he is as a person and a player at this point in his career.
Do you think that sort of confidence and stability comes from the new contract extension as well? There's a young man. He knows he's going to be in Indianapolis for at least the next 4 seasons. Do you think that adds to that confidence?
Maybe a little bit, but you could probably argue that he should have had that confidence last year, because I think it was right up until the deadline that the two sides had been discussing the extension, and they definitely had an agreement and a contract that goes into effect this year. So now he's finally getting paid, but he knew last year that he had that long-term security. What I think it is, Paul George was the guy for so long. And I think Miles early in his career, to be perfectly honest, I think he walked on eggshells a little bit, and I don't want that to come out the wrong way, but I think he was always trying to impress Paul and do the right thing. And he was impressionable a little bit early in his career. And then even last year and, towards the end of the year before, it was, painfully obvious, not painfully, but it was obvious that it was kind of Victor Oladipo's team. And while I thought Miles and Victor had a really good relationship, he was always careful to not let Victor down. And now, where you think about it, toward the end of last year, Victor was injured. And so that was more responsibility, more pressure, I guess, for Miles to be the guy. And, I don't think the playoff series was his best performance, especially from an offensive perspective. But going into the start of the season, that Victor's not there. So, the other 5 starters, the other 4 starters can kind of look around and say, who's the guy? And I think it's pretty equal. Like, I'm not putting the pressure on Miles that he has to be the guy. but I think he accepts that and wants that and feels like he, as the longest tenured Pacer, someone that knows the staff more than anybody, knows the system. He really knows everything about what it means to be an Indiana Pacer. So he also is growing as a leader as well. So the confidence in the long-term contract, it helps, but I just think it's the experience and everything that he's been through with this team. You can't help but be more comfortable and have it show on and off the court.
Yeah, and JJ, I know you earlier mentioned training camp. I know it's only been a couple of weeks, but outside of maybe Miles, who's impressed you the most, or is there a new guy that stood out to you?
I was really interested to see those first couple preseason games because I saw 3 days of training camp, and then they went to India. And so I wondered if what I saw those first few days of practice would translate onto the court. And I expected to be, see a little bit of a rough showing just because they didn't have that much training camp. But TJ Warren is someone that you saw it in that first preseason game. And for him to, score 30 points, but also hit that big shot to force overtime. And basically, everyone said he's a professional scorer. It's kind of been the buzzword about TJ Warren. I've seen it in practice, the confidence that he's shown from outside the three-point arc, but I wanted to see it in the game. And that was probably one of my biggest concerns with not just, Thaddeus Young, I think defensively caused me some concern for him not being there, but Bojan Bogdanovic's three-point shooting ability. I wondered if TJ Warren could really be that kind of confident three-point shooter, because I think that you have to have a guy like that in your lineup the way the NBA is right now. And so I saw some, three-point shooting confidence early in training camp, and then I saw it in those first two preseason games. So I have no doubt that TJ Warren is going to be, an 18 to 20 point per game guy. But then I saw the effort that he's made on the defensive end, not just in those games, but in practices. And it gave me some confidence that he can kind of be, not to compare him to Bojan again, but he can be a Bojan Bogdanovic type of defender, someone that you didn't think was a really good defensive player when he was acquired or when he joined the Pacers. But in this system, as long as you put the effort forth, you can succeed. And you can make some mistakes, but it's almost like if you make a mistake out of aggression, it's okay and someone can help you. But if you're passive and you're on your heels, that's not acceptable and that won't work. And I haven't seen him, passive at all, not in the practices and not in the game. So he's probably been my biggest bright spot of that starting lineup and early in training camp and in those first two games. And the other bright spot I would say is the depth. I don't really yet know what the 5-man bench rotation or 4.5, as sometimes Nate likes to play, will be. But I know that there is competition and there is really 3 guys that are probably, on the outside of that second unit, if everyone is healthy, that are really fighting to get in there. And it's making practice very competitive, and it's making, these preseason games fun to watch because guys like Jakar Sampson, Justin Holiday, and TJ McConnell, they're not exactly locked to be in that rotation, to be playing, regular minutes on opening night, despite having, good NBA careers up to this point and being guys that aren't young players. So those 3 guys in particular are really pushing the second unit and, to be honest, pushing the starters. And so I really like the, top 13, I guess. And we've seen some injuries from Goga Bitadze and TJ Leaf. And so that's really given some of those guys an opportunity. But the other answer of impressed with is the second unit that really spills into the third unit.
It's really funny you bring up the bench because we just had a whole episode talking about the bench battles that are upcoming, especially in Vic's absence, because with absence comes opportunity. So one of the things that we talked about and we had a little disagreement over was the backup point guard position between Aaron Holiday and TJ McConnell. You've got 2 very different players. You've got one that relies on a lot of hustle and defense and intangibles. You've got one that's more of a shot maker. How do you see that backup point guard role playing out over the course of the season, and who do you give the edge to in training camp so far?
To be honest, it's fascinating because, Nate is someone that, and based on my experience with him now, 3-4 years, longer than that if you count his time as an assistant, I think he has a set way that he likes to do things, but he has been willing to adjust in his coaching career. And so I think that in the past, he would always say, these are my 5 starters, and he's actually been, pretty clear in saying what the starting lineup will be on opening night. But these are my 4 or 5 bench players, and we've really seen it be 4.5, that, the 5th bench player traditionally has played the first half and maybe not the second half. But I can see it changing depending on performance. And I think that competition is healthy. And specifically with your question about the point guard position, it depends really on what you think of Aaron Holiday. What is his best position? And I think that there is no doubt in my mind that Aaron Holiday will be a regular rotation player unless he does something to fall out of that spot. Like, he is the kind of player with his athleticism, with where he was drafted. If he is not in the rotation early in the season, it's not going to be good for him, and it's probably not going to be good for the team. Like, he expects that, he wants that, and he, to me, has earned the right to be that kind of player. However, I do think there is some thought, and maybe some, not necessarily disagreement, but maybe two different schools of thought of, is he really best as a point guard or a 2 guard? And in reality, those are kind of interchangeable. But really, TJ McConnell, if he's on the court, he's really going to be your point guard. So I can see some scenarios where you have, although this would be kind of a short second unit, you have Aaron Holiday and TJ McConnell, and McConnell's the 1 and Aaron Holiday's the 2. Opening night, however, it does appear to me, just by watching the preseason games and being around the team, that, Aaron Holiday is going to be given an opportunity as a backup point guard, and maybe Edmund Sumner or Justin Holiday or some combination would kind of be your second unit too. But, I'm saying that 2 weeks before the start of the regular season. Injuries can happen, and really in those 2 preseason games, someone could really shine. I still think, there's no way that Aaron Holiday doesn't, get that opportunity early in the season, and he gets a longer leash. It's not like if he has one bad game, then he'll be out of the rotation. I think, they're very convinced that he's an NBA rotation player, and they'll give him that opportunity to show that in the first part of the season.
Yeah, that's great news to hear, and it's always good to have competition for minutes, I suppose. Indiana's a small market. We don't have really the luxury of signing a LeBron James or Anthony Davis in the offseason. In recent memory, only really the Detroit Pistons and the Mavericks have kind of won a championship from a small market. We know Kevin Pritchard, emphasizes on how important the draft is to the Pacers to succeed. We haven't really had any big free agent signings. Brogdon, I know he was one, but we still had to make a little trade there. Just want your opinion on the difficulties that a small market team has to face in today's ever-changing NBA.
You just can make less mistakes. You look at a team like the Lakers, it seemed like over the last 3 years, they did nothing right. They made numerous mistakes. And what happens? What's their punishment is they somehow are able to get LeBron James and Anthony Davis at the same time. So it just seems to me like it would be very easy to be a front office person in a place like that, in a market like that, because if you make a mistake one year, you just kind of start over, make a few trades and make a big signing, and you're back. And I don't think that Kevin Pritchard has that opportunity. And I'm sure it would be easier, but I think he and this group, they kind of like that challenge. And to play for the Pacers or to support the Pacers is to kind of be that, blue-collar, hard-nosed kind of player, and to be that fan that, sometimes kind of pulls for the underdog and believes in the things that, believes something can happen that maybe others don't. And so it's kind of a mindset that I do think permeates down from the front office to the players, and even to Australia, to Pacers fans. I mean, yeah, you would want the best player possible, but a couple years ago when LeBron James was set to become a free agent, there was some talk, well, what if you could get LeBron James? And I'm sure, the front office would have done it. But me personally, I kind of wanted to beat LeBron James more than I wanted to have him join the team.
I love that. So, I love that mentality.
You're right. I mean, and that's the only part about him going west. Like, yeah, it's okay. It's good. You get LeBron out of the East, but it still kind of bothers me a little bit. In all those playoff series, you couldn't have eliminated him at least once. It's like, how sweet was it for the Pacers of the late 90s to finally, beat the Knicks? I mean, that made that really cool. So I think that you can't make as many mistakes, but you have to kind of look for special kind of players. And you do need to kind of have an interview with someone before you acquire them, and a good conversation to know, will this guy fit in Indianapolis? Will he appreciate being a Pacer? And, for the most part, they've done a really good job. there are going to be mistakes. You're not going to be perfect. There are going to be, I'm sure, some trades and some signings that if they could do them all over again, they maybe wouldn't have done. But if you look a couple years ago, it's just proof of what the front office is looking for is what they did 2 years ago, I think, in that trade, acquiring Domantas Sabonis and Victor Oladipo. And you saw those guys with their personalities. You probably could have never envisioned Victor would blow up the way that he did. But even the Sabonis, some thought he was a throw-in. I have a feeling that the deal doesn't get done without him. They valued him that much. But look at how much they sort of fit the Pacer personality. And then the guys they got 2 years ago. And you say Bojan Bogdanovic, and Thaddeus Young had already been here for a year, but I kind of lump him into that group, and Corey Joseph. And those guys just kind of had that Pacer personality. That's the one thing I think going into this season I'm going to be disappointed is that some of those guys that meant so much the last 2 years won't be able to see this through. But their, impact was noted. And I think that, there are guys that, you win a championship in 2 or 3 years and maybe they don't get a ring, but maybe there's some symbolic way of thanking them for setting the culture. And then you just have to hope that a guy like TJ Warren, that Jeremy Lamb, that Malcolm Brogdon can kind of fit some of those personality traits that the guys who left had and can, blend together nicely. I think with Malcolm Brogdon specifically, he is without a doubt to me an Indiana Pacer. He represents kind of that Pacer personality. And I think some of those other guys can fit in well. You just have to see over the course of the season. It's way too early to just automatically right now say all of those new guys, they're going to fit in perfect. It's going to be a jigsaw puzzle that fits perfectly. It's, it would be overly optimistic and naive for me to say that, but I do have faith in the front office in acquiring a certain type of guy and not just looking at the stats and the analytics and say, well, this guy is a great 3-point shooter. He's, this, we have to sign him. You have to kind of look at fit and roles. And the other thing that I think they do a really good job of, this has been a long-winded answer, but I've thought about this over the course of the offseason. They've paid guys what they deserve, not more, not less. And if you think about that, I think in the big markets, sometimes they can throw $30 million at a couple of max contract guys, but then you've got guys that are making $2 to $3 million that feel like they deserve 8 to 10. And they're not happy. And look back to the last couple of years, you had Bojan for around 10, and we never are really, given in the press releases or the press conferences the specific salaries, but it's, widely available. Everybody kind of knows the contract once it's signed. And you think you got a lot of like $10 million a year guys, like Darren was making 10, and Bojan was making 10, and Thad, was making 15 or maybe 12 to 15. But nobody on that roster really, to me, felt underpaid. And nobody was overpaid to the point where there was jealousy. And I think that's really, really important in team building. And so while they may not be, throwing out as much money as some teams, the responsibility, I think, helps in team chemistry. And so that is something I think that you could look to the past. And, you could say, Al Jefferson, that was maybe more money than he deserved at that point in his career. But he also kind of earned it by where he was. And by making that money and getting that contract, he also accepted a role when he wasn't playing or starting and did that to the best of his ability. So I think it's really important to pay guys what they are worth and what the CBA calls for, but not more and not less. I mean, you can't just say, let's get this guy on a bargain basement deal. It'll be great. Then he's maybe not going to be happy. You could go all the way back to the Lance Stevenson contract when they signed him at the end of the season. I was flabbergasted that it came out that they basically paid him, $4 million for that 1 year. Well, that was like 6 games in the playoffs. Like, that was crazy to me. But it was actually important that Lance felt wanted, and he basically got him into the playoffs. Now, at the end of the second year, it ended in a way that I'm not sure everybody expected or understood, but Lance couldn't have been disappointed with the way he was treated in his year and a half. I mean, the Pacers revived his career. So, I've thought about that recently, and I'll probably try to share that again on some other outlets. But it's the first time I've ever said it, and I think it kind of fits for this team.
It's so funny that you talk about culture, because it's something that we talk about almost every other episode. We reference the Pacers, willingness to sign guys that are high character, that fit in with that internal culture and the culture that's been built over the last many, many years. We've had a lot of turnover this year. So how do you see the culture has been affected by the change in personnel, the changing players? Obviously, we have recruited players that are high culture, that are high character. So you wouldn't think it'd be dramatically difficult to maintain. But do you think that it's built by the internal organisation? Do you think it's built by the players, the culture that is, or is it a combination of both? And how much does it change year to year?
It is definitely a combination, and it only relies upon your best players kind of setting the tone. And so that's one reason why I was a little, not concerned, but curious as to how this season would go, because your best player is injured to start the season. And then your next couple, really good players, if we just look to the front court, Sabonis and Miles Turner, are going to be trying something that I don't think anybody can tell you absolutely will work. I mean, it's going to be a little bit of a work in progress. And then you've got a couple of, 2-3 new starters, at least on opening night, Malcolm Brogdon, Jeremy Lamb, TJ Warren, that you believe in, but you don't really know until a season starts what their impact is, how they act off the court. So I just think it's important then that you look to the coaching staff. You see coaching staffs change all the time, even on successful teams. Nate McMillan, Dan Burke, Bill Bano, Popeye Jones. Those guys are now in how many years together? So they have a way of doing things. You don't want to stay the same all the time, but you can even trickle that down a little bit to some of the video staff personnel, the training staff, which was voted best in the NBA. I think that those guys probably help set the culture as much as anyone. I mean, Dan Burke has been here since the Larry Bird era. So if he doesn't set the culture, I'm not sure who else does. Josh Corbeil and Carl Eaton, from a training staff perspective, people that we say their names sometimes, we show them during games occasionally, the average fan might not know about. I know for a fact that those guys are so widely respected around the league that when players leave and go to other teams, they're among the first people that they come and say hi to and shake hands with before a game because of how well they were treated by that group. I mean, you have to have a good strength and conditioning and medical staff to be successful in the NBA. So I think that the coaches and really the support personnel, they help shape the culture. Then you look to your star players and you really put a lot of pressure on them and, faith in them. I mean, to who much is given, much is expected. Victor Oladipo makes a lot of money. Miles Turner now makes a lot of money, and Malcolm Brogdon signed a really big contract. Those guys have to set the culture, and they have to be the guys that everyone looks to when the going gets tough. There's going to be rough moments. There's going to be times when you go through a tough, 3 or 4 game losing streak. How do you rebound from that? So it's, it starts at the top with the coaches, but then it's almost like a food chain or a family tree. You kind of spread it out and you have a number of other people that have big roles.
Yeah, definitely. I think you hit the nail on the head there about the culture. But I know also, JJ, you've been with the team for a while now. You've been a sideline reporter with the Pacers for almost over half a decade, I think. But do you have a favorite moment or maybe a favorite game since your time joining the team?
It's funny. I often get some of these questions and, favorite moment, favorite game, favorite arena, things like that. And sometimes I don't have like this working list that I go through and change. And so sometimes it's just, what is off the top of my head. And, I'll even go back to before I was in this job, I was a reporter at Fox 59 and, would cover the Pacers in the playoffs. And so covering those early, LeBron James Miami Heat series from that role was thrilling and was great fun. But then I guess I would go to the playoff series against LeBron where, it ended in a Game 7 loss to the Cavaliers. But, games, 5 and 6, actually, to me, 3 and 5 were probably the most memorable. To me, the Game 3 win when Bojan Bogdanovic just kind of went crazy and looked like he was, was shooting with his eyes closed. That was maybe incredible. The most memorable. That was maybe the most amazing game. And at that point, the Pacers are in a position where, they take a 2-1 lead and you're feeling really good about their chances in the series. And you could definitely feel the empire starting to crumble a little bit from a Cavaliers perspective. Now, they lose game 4 and then they go to game 5, and that's probably the second most memorable game, because if you think about some of these playoff series, when the game's on ABC in the playoffs, we're not able to actually broadcast the game. But we broadcast that game 3 night with Bojan Bogdanovic, had a really good show, really good broadcast. And then I just remember everything about it. And then that game 5 in Cleveland, we also, broadcast. And I'll never forget coming on that post-game show. And I always have about, you guys actually probably don't even, on League Pass in Australia, you may or may not get to actually see the post-game show. It's one of my frustrations with League Pass is that
we actually don't get that.
They flip off as soon as the game coverage ends, and that's kind of when I do most of my work, is before and after that. But I usually have about 90 seconds to 2 minutes once Chris and Quinn have signed off from the game broadcast to kind of get my thoughts together. And I usually don't want to plan that out at all. It's best to just think about it right in the moment, have a few kind of key things that I want to hit on. And I can just remember walking out on the court, getting ready to stand on the court to do that post-game show. And it was just this, I can't believe it was right there, and I was still kind of actually at that time coming to understand the magnitude of the goaltending, because in the arena, it was hard to know what happened. And you were just thinking about that 3-pointer where, of anybody to shoot that, you don't want LeBron to shoot it, but because it was a tie game, I could understand you would rather him shoot a 3 than drive in. But it was like the way he hit that shot, it was just like, are you kidding me? Like, you had this team right there. The series was there for the taking, and LeBron just hit that shot. And, then it went back to game 7. But the games 3 and 5 were probably the most memorable of my time as a sideline reporter. And I hate to say all these memories are just like Pacer LeBron games, because it was Pacer Heat series and then Pacer Cavaliers series. And there have been so many, memorable games in the regular season. I could probably, in a follow-up maybe podcast, I could come up with a better list and detail some of those under the radar ones.
Yeah, that's a really great answer. And you mentioned, you'd rather LeBron take a 3 for the win, or we've definitely had LeBron drive to the hoop on the Pacers for the win in a playoff game as well.
Yeah.
Just a little 2-part question. Firstly, have you ever been to Australia? And secondly, what's your thoughts on Australian basketball? I'm sure you've watched Team USA play us down under recently, and you'd be well known about Ben Simmons and Patty Mills. What impresses you about Australian basketball?
Well, I will say, in watching some of the the games and the coverage from Team USA in Australia, just the atmosphere of that first game that Team USA was able to get the win. I thought about that. I mean, was it like 90,000 fans in the arena?
Yeah.
And
none of them could see the game.
I am going to probably try to follow up with Miles early in the season about that game and that night, because I was thinking, when he's probably never been in an atmosphere quite like that. I mean, you think about even his college career, Texas just was an average team, and I don't think Texas basketball is the same as Texas football. So to go in an environment like that and to see a passionate arena with that many fans, it's something that you never really get to experience. So I guess I'll just take note of the passion, and then, the kind of player. I mean, I even Matthew Dellavedova from some of these games against the Cavaliers, I kind of respect, even though, Pacer fans, he's the kind of guy that you don't really like. I respect kind of that hard-nosed mentality and the way he plays the game. And I mean, Australia showed in winning that exhibition game, the second one against Team USA, that they still have a lot of, good talent. I would love to visit someday. My wife actually went with her dad on a business trip once and was able to make that trip, and she speaks highly of it. The one thing that I would say, my personal Australian interaction, in 1996, I was working as an quote-unquote intern at the Summer Olympics in Atlanta. And I was actually the summer after high school. So I was 18 years old and basically got an internship with a cable company that we were to go around to the media center and make sure everybody's video boxes work. It's crazy even to think about now what that job was, because you had these little cable boxes and it allowed the media to cover the different events without going to all of them by making sure their cable box works. Now, you'd be streaming on a computer, but we didn't really know anything about our job. We basically were sent out, and if they had a problem, we would then radio to somebody else who could. But as an 18-year-old in Atlanta covering the Olympics with one of my good friends, we took advantage of the extra time to schmooze with anybody that we could. And some of the nicest people that we encountered were the groups of people from Australia that were there to promote the 2000 Olympics that were going to be in Sydney. So I'll never forget just the hospitality that some of those people showed us as they tried to, get us excited. Even though we didn't end up getting to go to cover the Olympics, they treated us just the same as 18-year-old kids, just like any other full-time professional. And so some of that kindness and that hospitality I witnessed firsthand, and it made me want to go to Australia. Still haven't been, but maybe someday.
That's great. It's always good to hear people speak highly of the hospitality that Australians have shown, because that's probably one of the hallmarks of our culture when we try and pay it forward when we meet others. JJ, this has been absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much for your time. One final question though, looking forward to the season. Predictions, any particular predictions? We're not necessarily after win totals or after where you think we'll finish, but any specific predictions that you've got for the Indiana Pacers in the 2019-20 upcoming season?
It's tough because I'm still kind of getting, used to the new players and kind of seeing how they all work. And, to be honest, without really knowing what Victor Oladipo's timeline is and also how he will be when he comes back, it's really tough to kind of put a win number out there. Looking at the Eastern Conference, though, it does appear to me as though Philadelphia and Milwaukee, in no particular order, are kind of the two best teams, and that, spots kind of 3 through 5 are wide open in that not just 3 teams for 3 spots, but, I could say, 6, maybe even 7 teams can enter the season thinking they could be a home court advantage team in the Eastern Conference. I guess the way I look at this season is the more I think about it, the more respect I have for what last year's group was able to accomplish. I don't think that they get the credit they deserve because of how the season ended in the playoffs, but to think that they lost Victor Oladipo for a big chunk in late November and then for the season in late January and still finish with the exact same amount of wins as they had the year before, and to think that, let's be honest, their acquisitions to last year's team, Tyreek Evans, Doug McDermott, and Kyle O'Quinn were basically like the 3 big newcomers, and then you add in Aaron Holiday. They weren't wildly successful. So to basically not get as much as many thought you would from the new players, to lose Oladipo for over half the season, and to still win 48 games and still get the 5 seed, I kind of find remarkable. And so it makes me not want to doubt what they can do if Victor misses half of this season. But it also makes me think, if they win, 43, 44, 45, I still think that they could be in position to have a better postseason. Maybe not as good of an overall record, but by the time it's April, maybe they're not out of gas like last year's team maybe was. And maybe they don't have as many weaknesses or deficiencies that, offensively that team was a little bit challenged last year. I think they can make up for the non-Oladipo games early with their offense, and then they can get to the postseason. And if he's back, they have so many more other, capable weapons. So I guess my prediction could be maybe they don't win as many games. Maybe they're not a top 4 seed, but I can see them advancing at least to the second round. I think this is a team. There's no reason why, they aren't playing basketball in May. And I think everybody's sort of tired of getting into the playoffs and losing in the first round. So it's not a prediction, but almost a belief and an expectation. This team can be playing basketball in May.
We all certainly hope that the Indiana Pacers can play basketball deep into May and even June. You can listen to JJ on Pacers Sound, on Apple Podcasts, on the Sideline Guys. JJ, thank you so much for your time. It's much appreciated for 3 guys halfway across the world that have started a Pacers podcast. This means the world to us. So thank you so much for your time today.
I appreciate the invitation. Thank you for kind of helping spread the word about, the Pacers and also the Sideline Guys. We're planning to up the game a little bit with Sideline Guys this year. So Pat will have some announcements and we'll have some news to share on Twitter in the next couple of weeks, but we're trying to make it a little bit bigger, a little bit better, expand the product just a little bit here in this season. So it should be a fun year and I can't wait to get started.
We'll be listening. Thanks so much, JJ.
Thanks, JJ.